Hello and welcome to the Pop Pod. I am Sam, also known as Pop Sam Cam, and today I am going to talk about this huge shift that we have had in music, where we've gone from the really over-the-top, exciting pop space that we had last year with names like Sabrina Carpenter and Chappell Roan, as compared to this year, which has gone in a much more conservative direction. I'm going to talk about the artists who are leading that, why it happens, and what it says about us as a culture. But before that, if you like this podcast, I would love it if you would come and subscribe and join us all the time. And if you like it even more than that, you can rate us 5 stars. I know if you listen to this all the time, I say it all the time, but it does really help with the visibility of the podcast and helps us get more ears and pop fans on the Pop Pod. This one's for you. If you want to join a community of pop fans, the Discord is in the show notes, and you can come and talk with me and others on the daily about recent pop releases, throwbacks, news, controversial opinions, whatever you want to drop in there, it's all there. And I'm sure that today's podcast is going to conjure some opinions, because it's talking about a pretty controversial shift in music that's happening right now, and one that's not so exciting for the pop fans like you that are listening to this podcast. Let's get into it. So last year, had I made this podcast, things would have sounded very different. We were celebrating the arrival of names like Sabrina Carpenter and Chappell Roan on the mainstream. We were seeing acts like Charli XCX rise up from a niche fan base into a much larger one. And I feel like the temperature of pop was really hot. The charts were full of escapist pop music. The summer was full of songs that sounded like summer, and really, nothing can soundtrack summer quite like a good pop song can. And I wondered what this year was going to bring, because last year we had so many releases from huge pop stars. We had Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, Billie Eilish, Beyonce. We had Charli in the summer. We obviously had Sabrina Carpenter's record that came later. I'm probably forgetting so many because there was just so many releases. And it was a mix of these old established names coming through, and old, I mean, when we're talking about Billie Eilish, she's hardly old, but you know what I mean. They've been around for a while. And then we also had the arrival of really exciting fresh faces who had been doing it for a little while with much smaller audiences and had finally broke through. And it was just really exciting to see these ideals embraced by people. And I feel like it was leading me to think that there were a number of things happening in pop music, and that's that it was becoming more liberated and a little more provocative. A lot of the stars who were making music that soundtracked 2024 were making music that was dirty and cheeky and a little bit explicit. And the other thing that was happening is with names like Chappell Roan, it was becoming like very queer as well. With a name like Chappell Roan, for example, and everything that she's singing about and what she stands for, I couldn't have imagined that happening in pop in a mainstream sense 10 years ago. And the third thing that's happening is that it's taking sounds and influences from places that are surprising. I mean, the whole Brat movement comes from kind of an underground electronic place, and the fact that that was able to rise up into the mainstream gave me hope that pop was really diversifying. Fast forward a year, things are looking very different. On the charts at the moment, we have names instead like Alex Warren, Benson Boone, Teddy Swims, Morgan Wallen. And these, I don't want to group all these together and say that what they're all making is terrible music, because that's not the case at all. But what they are representing is a shift towards something far more safer, far more traditional, and far more conservative. Many of these names have kind of strong religious beliefs or religious backgrounds, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is coming through in the music, which is kind of rare for pop music when you think about some of the biggest figures in pop music and how kind of they have challenged those conservative norms. I'm thinking of names like Madonna and Lady Gaga in particular, who have really gone up against those kind of things. So to go back to this after a period of looking like we were shifting in towards something that was far more I don't want to say edgy or groundbreaking, because I think that you can be those things and still have this kind of belief system, but definitely something that feels like a lot more 20 years ago than it feels right now. And that was really interesting to me, because as I've said, I expected there to be a trajectory for pop music where this was just going to keep happening. And instead, what we've seen is some of the major pop releases this year, and there have been a few, haven't managed to really cut through. I'm talking about Lady Gaga with Mayhem, particularly in the US. Abracadabra and Disease struggled on the charts. They both failed to get into the top 10. And while I think Abracadabra did a much better job in the end, it certainly wasn't like a blockbuster hit here. Instead, Die With a Smile is the huge single off the record, and that represents something far more traditional.
I wanna hold you just for a while and die with a smile.
It's a ballad. It features somebody who is a very safe radio choice in Bruno Mars, and it has a sound that is quite vintage and familiar to people, whereas Abracadabra and Disease don't share that lineage at all with Die With a Smile. And then I think of someone like Miley Cyrus, who's done something quite experimental and has also been a figurehead of some of these more explicit and groundbreaking moments in pop music. And then also someone like Tate McRae as well, who is obviously a rising pop name who has done well this year, but has also struggled to have a top 10 record. And the people who have not struggled to have a top 10 record are the people who are making country or folk music, a lot of guitars, a lot of kind of lyrics that could relate to a large amount of people, and they're trading in this idea of authenticity that was actually something that was really thrown around last year when it came to names like Charli XCX. And the reason for that is that it felt like they were doing something that was so outside of what was happening in the mainstream that the authenticity conversation came because they hadn't had to compromise their beliefs or their image in order to enter a mainstream space. Whereas the authenticity conversation, when it comes to names like Alex Warren and Morgan Wallen, basically comes down to the fact that they have guitars, that they supposedly, well, I mean, I'm sure they do, write their own songs, and that they have this sound that, I mean, I think I need to talk about a different time period to really explain this, but I feel like when it comes to relatability, we found in the Ed Sheeran Adele era that ballads worked really well to sell that, and acoustic instruments worked really well to sell that, because selling yourself as a singer-songwriter made the audience feel somewhat closer connected to you. And I also think that it works really well on radio in that way. And when we talk about Alex Warren's Ordinary, which is a #1 single in the US and the UK, it will probably go on to be one of the biggest, most defining songs of 2025.
Taking me out of the ordinary. I want you laying me down so we're dead and buried on the edge of your knife.
The whole kind of viral campaign for it starts because of weddings, and this song being a wedding song, which when you think of a lot of Ed Sheeran songs, I'm thinking specifically about Thinking Out Loud. The seed for that is born with weddings as well. And that is able to tug at people's heartstrings on TikTok and on radio without really challenging anything at all. There is no real belief system being shaken up with presenting a song like that. And I think that's exactly where culture is right now. Obviously, at the end of 2024, we shift into a conservative government. And so it makes sense that the culture begins to reflect the time as well. But I feel like when you push the needle so far one way, it's inevitable that it's going to swing back very far in the opposite direction. And the reason I think that is because when I started to notice this kind of conservative shift on the charts, I started to look back at previous periods where pop felt escapist and where pop felt colorful and where pop felt like it was challenging the norm in some kind of way. And this seems to happen every, I want to say 8 to 10 years almost. And it's always led by a sudden shift in music. And what happens in the late 2000s, early 2010s is recession pop starts to come in a big way, and it's led by names like Katy Perry. It's exacerbated by something like EDM, and it's further carried through by hip-hop names like Nicki Minaj, who are bringing pop to a far more sexually liberated space, to a far more feminist space, and to a far more explicit space, I want to say, as well, all coupled together with this sort of idea of silliness and provoking people through theatrics. We start to see Lady Gaga do things like art pop, which is so provoking. We see Nicki Minaj do a song like Anaconda.
My anaconda don't want none unless you got buns, hun.
All these like moments that are almost made to make the audience raise an eyebrow, but in some way they are pushing culture open and making us more accepting to things like this, to the point where we can arrive at a moment like WAP, which I think is probably one of the most explicit singles to ever make it to number one in US history.
On the top, make it drop, that's some wet and cushy. Now get a bucket and a mop, that's some wet and cushy.
But that was only 5 years ago, and somehow it feels like this year we are so far away from that moment where there is no way, even though we are seeing the success of names like Sexy Red and Glorilla and Megan Thee Stallion as well, who could deliver a moment like that easily. Obviously, Megan was on WAP, so she can definitely do that. But there are a bunch of people who could do that, and while they are having success, they are kind of landing around the midpoint of the Billboard Hot 100 and unable to lodge a top 10 single in the same way that these much safer radio choices are. And I think radio programmers are starting to take less risks this year. I think that streaming is just like the playlisting is falling on songs that are familiar, and I think to have some kind of familiarity, you need to be dipping into the vintage in some kind of way. And I'm talking about like a sort of 80s rock, almost like 70s, 80s sort of more traditional pop star model, which leads to names like Benson Boone ending up on the charts for a long time. And I think that these songs can last for a long time is because they don't come with any particular splash that ages them. No genre, I think, ages faster than pop, and that's kind of why I love it, because it defines a period for a moment and then it goes away. And often in that time, it can be shocking, it can be thought-provoking, it can lead us to artists who have a massive rise and then fall off. Whereas names like Teddy Swims and Benson Boone in particular don't give you that vibe because they haven't had that huge sort of like what do I want to say? Kind of head-scratching moment that makes everybody turn around in sort of like a, is this okay kind of way? Everybody knows this is okay because how could it not be? It's so straight down the line. The lyrics aren't really challenging anything, extremely monogamous in what they're saying. And for that reason, it just is so easy for a large group of people to get on board with it. Whereas I think a name like Chappell, things are a little more difficult for her to get that kind of programming because she is, one, appealing to a much niche audience with the things that she does. And obviously that can go mainstream, but the songs that go mainstream, I think, are the ones where people can project something far more vanilla onto it. I'm thinking of Pink Pony Club. I think all the people that are singing that song in karaoke bars and bars around the country right now are not really singing it for its original meaning, but just taking it totally at face value and not really overthinking it too much. And I feel like we saw that her path to stardom is a little more challenging this year when she released The Giver.
You ain't gotta tell me, it's just in my nature, so take it like a taker. So baby, I'm a giver.
Which is a country song. It fits with the exact sound that 2025 is going with. And if Morgan Wallen released that song, it would have been a massive hit. But it is a song essentially about lesbian sex. And that is a difficult thing to sell in 2025 completely. Going back to the Nicki Minaj and Lady Gaga conversation and the post-EDM movement that was happening in the 2010s, something quite significant happens after. And I never thought that I would be making a podcast where I'm naming the Lumineers as a huge influence on a time period in music, but the Lumineers are a big influence right now. This whole like hand clap stomper movement that's going on, that's being really led by names like Alex Warren. I can tie back to 2013 when a similar moment starts to happen, when pop reaches boiling point of the absurd and it starts to go in a much safer direction. And instead of having people like Nicki Minaj leading the charts, we start to see people like Macklemore leading them with songs about thrift shops and Can't Hold Us, which with much more anthemic, inspiring sort of lyrics and melodies. Katy Perry, who had been quite provocative in her Teenage Dream era, has a song like Raw, which also has that anthemic vibe to it. The Lumineers, as I said, go viral for 2013 with Ho Hey. Is it Ho Hey? Hey Ho? One of those. And at the same time, we're reaching the peak of this pop moment because you've got names like Miley Cyrus with We Can't Stop. But everything shifts in 2013. Bruno Mars then comes through with songs like Locked Out of Heaven. And then by the time we get to 2014, I think that's when we start to see that things have totally gone in the opposite direction. The biggest song of 2014 is Happy by Pharrell Williams, which basically exists for no other reason than to create this kind of false sense of optimism. One Republic go back big with Counting Stars, another song that has a very 2025 vibe to it.
I've been losing sleep, dreaming about the things that we could be.
When things are provocative, there were songs like Meghan Trainor's All About That Bass, which despite being about celebrating curvaceous women, has this very conservative sound that goes back to the 1950s with what it's doing with the doo-wop thing.
Because you know I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, no trouble.
Other songs that are big in that year, All of Me, John Legend, like I said with the Alex Warren wedding thing, All of Me could have been a wedding song.
'Cause all of me loves all of you.
And then also the Lord Royals thing happens, which takes pop in a different direction. And obviously Royals is not a conservative kind of song, but it really treads on the high tempo kind of pop thing.
And we'll never be royals. It's a run in our blood.
That was happening. And then it takes years for us to build up once again to the point that we were getting to in 2020, where we had WAP, where we had Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia, that then led to 2024, where we have Sabrina Carpenter's Short and Sweet, and we can celebrate these really high-octane pop singles. And so I feel like it is just this kind of thing, and we do see it in politics as well, and culture just generally. When you push things very far to one direction, you're inevitably going to end up in the other direction very soon. And I think what happens after periods of high sort of political and cultural anxiety, we do get a push to safer music because people start to tire of being confronted in some kind of way. And this music is easy to put on and feel good about yourself, feel good about pretty safe belief systems without having to overthink things too much. And I kind of looked up what had happened through all the political eras in history and found that this movement has often happened in a Republican kind of era of politics, particularly the Bush era in the 2000s, and particularly post 9/11 was when we really started to see the rise of acts like Dido and Coldplay and Five for Fighting, these sort of acts that could play very easily on the radio and essentially get like defined as being easy listening in some kind of way. It also, I think in the first Trump era, happens a lot with people like Ed Sheeran and Adele having massive success. And I mean, I don't want to say that, I don't want to put a like, this is a good or a bad thing. in terms of the music that happens, because obviously I think Adele's made some phenomenal music, but you just cannot say that her music is not more safe in the way that it leans lyrically and the kind of themes that it deals with. And I will say, I think that people right now are finding it a lot easier to digest the thrill of Benson Boone doing a backflip on stage, more so than they are the more complex notions that Chappell Roan is bringing up in her music and what she's doing up on stage. I mean, she gets on the Grammys and she talks about fair pay for artists. She's constantly supporting the trans community. These are kind of things that I think I was getting extremely excited by last year. And then I've seen this year in terms of the backlash for Chappell is that people just grow tired of being provoked in this kind of way. I will say it's a hell of a lot easier for a PR team and a label to manage somebody like Alex Warren, who is making music that caters to a large amount of people and doesn't really push any buttons because the ground that it's treading is so familiar, than it is to manage somebody like Chappell, who is actively trying to push things forward. And I know that she has come under a lot of criticism over the past couple months in particular, in terms of whether people think it's performative or whatever, but you cannot say when she's out there standing up for young musicians and also the trans community that she is not trying to push things forward in some way and shake the ground in a way that makes people, quite frankly, uncomfortable. And the same thing can be said for Lady Gaga, who steps up at the Grammys and talks about how we need to be supporting the trans community in this moment as well, which is obviously an ideal that I wholeheartedly agree with. But next year at the Grammys, I think it's going to be a totally different scenario where we're going to see people like Alex Warren getting up and thanking God and thanking his wife. And that is just way more palatable to the whole of America, particularly when we've voted in this president who is giving an excuse for people to ignore all the other stuff. Ignore might be the wrong word, but kind of shun supposed wokeness. I think that we can feel like we've been blindsided into this movement in some kind of way this year as pop fans, particularly when last year we're celebrating Beyonce's Cowboy Carter and what she was teaching us about the black origins of country music, only to turn around and have Shaboozey replaced at the top by somebody like Morgan Wallen. But this movement was already happening. We saw this obviously with Oliver Anthony, who came through with that viral country hit, which was basically shunning politicians and standing up for the working class.
It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you.
We saw it with Jason Aldean, who is basically just like a walking billboard against any DEI sort of policy.
Around here we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long.
So there were these moments starting to happen, but we had these huge pop moments peppered in between, and now that peppering is totally gone. I mean, the Billboard Hot 100 at the time of recording this, I don't think has a single pop song in the top 10. The closest that we get to it is Luther with Kendrick Lamar and SZA, which I think is an incredible song. But once again, we feel worlds away from that celebration of Kendrick Lamar's work that was going on at the end of last year. And I wonder if by the time we get to the Grammys, this kind of cultural temperature will have overtaken some place like that as well, that is always willing to skew further to the conservative side, but has been trying to push themselves forward in previous years. But it almost feels like if the mainstream is moving this way, the Grammys could move in this way as well. And I guess the Grammys is always like a little bit behind a certain movement. So maybe by next February when the Grammys happens, they will be totally on board with this conservative wave of music that is happening. I guess the bright side of this is that when these kind of things happen, things start to bubble underneath, and I guess underground and more niche pop movements begin to happen, and you get artists like Charli XCX who are cutting their teeth in the background. You also have artists like Tinashe who was doing the same thing, and by doing that, I guess when there's some kind of challenge to the liberation of pop music, things start to happen underground that are really exciting, where people experiment and people will almost protest in a way that's like creatively weird. And eventually it all comes full circle. We have been here before, as I said, 2013, 14, the same kind of thing was happening. And it may last for a year, it may last for 2 years, but it goes away eventually and something else replaces it. Thank goodness. Thankfully, no matter which way the needle pushes, somebody's always going to try and push it back the other way, which is the relief in all of this. Because personally, I was feeling so excited about the space that music was going into last year, and I just can't believe where we've ended up. And a lot of that too has to do with the fact that the Billboard Hot 100 is moving a lot slower. That's because streaming hits just last longer. It's because radio programmers leave songs on radio for a lot longer. And so that's why we see songs like Beautiful Things by Benson Boone and Lose Control by Teddy Swims stick around for so long, because they're just a safe bet to have on playlists, and both radio and streaming playlists. And that is creating a stagnant kind of chart as well. And maybe people are going to tire of hearing the same song over and over again, and things are going to become a bit more fast paced. We're just going to have to wait and see. But I thought that it was worth talking about today, this shift that I've been noticing, and I'm sure you've been noticing as well, because it's just been so apparent in the last couple weeks. And I think the cherry on top is Alex Warren going to number one with Ordinary. And I don't mean to say that Alex Warren is pop fans' number one enemy, but he's just really signifying a huge shift in music that's going on right now. I am super interested to hear your thoughts on this, how you feel about this turn from pop being extremely open and exciting last year to being in the space that it is right now. Drop into my comments with any thoughts that you have on it, or any reasoning you have for why this is happening. If we can do a part 2 on this, keep exploring these mainstream trends, I would love to do that. Come and join me in the Discord as well when we can discuss it a little bit further. Otherwise, make sure you are following this podcast, rate it 5 stars, and I will see you when I return on the Pop Pod. Thank you so much for listening.